Good late afternoon, everybody. SuperJax01 here. Now, we're going to be doing a big video that I know a lot of you have been waiting for. Well, now we're going to do it. I am now going to be ranking all 37 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, aka the MCU. As you all know, the MCU, it's my all-time favorite film franchise. I've been a fan of this franchise for about 7 years now. And, for the fun of it, I thought I'd rank all them. I thought I'd do a ranking video for all of them. Now, in terms of what counts, we are only going over the 37 theatrical films that they released. I'm not including any of the Disney Plus shows like WandaVision, Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, Secret Invasion, Echo, Daredevil, Attorney at Law, Agatha All Along, etc. We're not going to be including those. I will also not be including the two holiday specials, that being Werewolf by Night and the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special. This is just going to be the 37 theatrical films in the MCU. We're going to be going backwards from my least favorite to my number one favorite. This is going to be a big video, so strap in as we rank all of the MCU movies. Let's get started.
Disappointment in the game of life.
And my personal pick for the worst MCU film of all time goes to... Yeah. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is not very good at all. It is the only MCU film that I can say that I genuinely do not like at all. There's just so many issues with this movie that I don't even know where to start. This movie feels different from the first two Ant-Man films, and I don't mean that in a good way. It tries to take itself so seriously and have this much darker tone that ultimately ends up coming off as forced. To me, the Ant-Man movies are supposed to be these fun and lighthearted comedies that the audience can enjoy after the big Avengers movies. They're not supposed to be taken this seriously. The fact that characters like Lewis, Kurt, and Dave were completely absent from this movie baffles me. They're one of the best things about the Ant-Man films, so the fact that they couldn't find a way to use them in this movie is ridiculous. The direction that they decided to go with in terms of using the character of MODOK is terrible. Having him be Darren from the first Ant-Man film was a bad idea. The CGI of him is absolutely abysmal and hideous looking. That's another thing. Most of the CGI in this movie is abysmal. Like, what happened? 98% of the movie is practically green screen because they're in the quantum realm for most of it. The CGI characters look like something out of a PlayStation 2 game from the early 2000s. Honestly, I think the CGI in Spy Kids 3D Game Over looked better than this. The fact that the movie tried to keep Kang a secret for the first half of the film mind boggles me. Why did Janet not just tell Hope and Hank about Kang when she was down there? The whole movie could have literally been avoided if she had just done that. Then all the people in the quantum realm are very vague when talking about Kang. They just refer to him as either he or him. It's like they were trying to keep Kang a secret to the audience and have it be this big surprise. That might have worked if he wasn't in every single trailer and ad for the movie. If I were to say one thing that I liked about this movie, it would easily be Kang. The best parts of the movie are when he's on screen. Jonathan Majors, however you may feel about him, was actually really good casting for this character. Yet, at the same time, this is another big issue with the film in which it honestly felt more like Kang's movie instead of Ant-Man's. It's like they just needed a movie to introduce Kang and decided to do that with a third Ant-Man film. Of course, the Kang storyline is now no longer a thing after what happened with Jonathan Majors, thus now making this movie pointless. But yeah, this movie is just so bad and the worst MCU film ever, and I hope to never have to watch it again.
It's a 2 movie, but it's not a Bug's Life 2.
Iron Man 2 is also not very good. I don't hate it as much as Quantumania because it does have at least a few good elements. It introduces us to Black Widow, who is a great character. Some of the action scenes are decent, like that fight at the racetrack is really good, and the climax is probably the best part of the whole movie. But with that said, there's a lot of issues that really keep me from calling this a good movie. The script is so bland. Well, it feels like a movie from the post-Endgame era, if you ask me. You could tell that they really rushed it. This is the only MCU film that I feel it feels like a genuine cash grab. I wouldn't be surprised if writer Justin Thorks only wrote one draft of the script and didn't have time to do rewrites to work out some of the kinks. Ivan Vanko is honestly one of the worst MCU villains, if you ask me. He's so bland and forgettable that I don't even remember what exactly his goal and motivation was. I wasn't a fan of how much slapstick humor there was in this movie. Like, there's a section of the film where Tony gets drunk while he's in his Iron Man suit, and it's just not as funny as the movie seemed to think it was. And arguably the biggest issue with this movie is that it felt like its main focus was to just set up the Avengers movie instead of focusing on the next chapter of Tony Stark's story. Honestly, this is pretty much the only Infinity Saga MCU film that I genuinely think you could skip and not really miss anything. The only element that really makes this movie worth watching is that it introduces us to Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow. So if you want a proper introduction to her character, then watch this movie. But honestly, The Avengers is a fine enough introduction to her character.
Dark.
Thor: The Dark World is a movie that I've never been a fan of. For a long time, it was actually my least favorite MCU film. But on this recent viewing, which was the first time I had seen the film in years, I liked it a little more than I did in the past. I'm gonna be honest, like, I was actually really into the movie for the first 45 minutes or so. There was a lot of interesting elements, like Loki having to face the consequences for his actions in the Avengers, Jane being injected with the Reality Stone, and Thor bringing her to Asgard, which, leads to her, seeing Asgard and being there. That was some really juicy stuff that I wish the movie had explored more of. But after Frigga gets killed, I feel like the movie goes downhill from there. The second act revolves around Thor reluctantly recruiting Loki to go confront Malekith, and it's just not that interesting and sort of a slog to get through. Then the third act revolves around Thor and Jane going to Earth and working with Darcy, her intern, and Eric to defeat Malekith, and it just feels like a different film. The script is a complete mess. As most of you probably know, this movie had a very troubled production. There were apparently heavy script rewrites that were done while they were shooting the movie. You can really tell when you watch the finished film. Malekith is a terrible villain, honestly. Ignoring the fact that he's an entirely CGI creature, he's just so bland and doesn't really have a personality. He doesn't feel like a big evil threat because of that. Also, personally, I really didn't feel anything from Frigga's death. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like she just didn't have enough screen time in this movie or the first film for me to really connect with her and feel sad when she gets killed. I don't know if I'm in the minority for that, but that's my personal opinion. Overall, this isn't a terrible film, but there's a lot of writing problems that really hold it back, which is a shame because I liked what they were going for, and I think this could have been a great film had they had more time to work on the script.
Who wrote the book of law?
I'm gonna be honest, I don't hate Thor: Love and Thunder as much as everyone else does. Sure, it's nowhere near as good as Ragnarok, but I think we all knew that it was never gonna top it. It's also got a lot of writing issues, but I don't think it's the giant piece of shit that everyone thinks it is. It's got some good elements. The best thing about this movie was its villain, Gore the God Butcher. He might be the scariest and most creepy MCU villain yet. Seeing that they turned New Asgard into a tourist attraction for people to visit was actually kind of cool and interesting, since nobody could visit the old Asgard. It was nice to see that Valkyrie decided to make the new one accessible for the public. I'm also probably in the minority here, but I actually really liked that climax where Thor gives all the Asgard kids special ability powers in order to help fight Gore. I thought it was really cute and fun. Sure, it obviously doesn't live up to the amazing climax in Ragnarok, but I still thought it was pretty cute. I also think the movie is at least entertaining. It's worth watching if you're looking to kill 2 hours or something. However, it's still got problems. A lot of them. One of my personal biggest issues with the movie is how rushed the first act is, and how they practically jumpstart Jane's story. This movie was the first time that we had seen Jane Foster in almost 9 years, so I feel like her return should have been this big moment. But instead, we're kind of just dropped into the middle of her story and told right away that she's dying of cancer. No build-up or anything. Same with her transformation into the mighty Thor. Within 15 minutes into the film, they're already like, here's Jane Foster, she has cancer, she's doing research, she's in Asgard, she's reached Forge Mjolnir, and now she's Thor. It feels like all these elements should have been the first act or even its own separate movie. One of the things that people complain about with this movie is its over-reliance on humor. It seems like because Ragnarok had a lot of humor in it, they were trying to repeat the same element for this movie, but it seemed like they forgot why it worked in that film. Meanwhile, this movie tries to have gags and jokes in every single scene, even if it's supposed to be a serious moment. For example, I absolutely hated that running gag with the screaming goats. Even when that was an internet meme back in the day, I never found it funny, yet the movie seemed to think it was the funniest thing ever because it kept repeating this gag and keeping the goats around for the whole thing, and it just got so annoying. The way that the movie is structured feels very clunky, as if there were pieces missing. According to Chris Hemsworth and director Taika Waititi, the first cut of this movie was about 4 hours long. I would honestly like to see this original 4-hour cut of the film because I want to see if these deleted scenes would have clarified a lot of things. Because at times it feels like you just skipped over major chunks of the movie. There's so many tonal inconsistencies. Like I said, gore was probably the best thing about this movie. I liked how dark and scary it was. However, I feel like he belonged in a different movie. It's clear that they wanted this movie to be a lighthearted comedy, yet the villain is this dark and serious man who wants to slaughter all of the existing gods. Not to mention that the central conflict of Jane's story is that she's dying of stage 4 cancer. These elements do not fit in a comedy. Overall, I don't hate this movie as much as everyone else does. It's got some decent elements, but there's just so many writing issues and total shifts that really hold this back from being a great movie.
Wakanda Forever!
I'm probably not going to make many friends with this next placement, but I've never been the biggest fan of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I try to be more forgiving for how this movie came out considering the circumstances that happened behind the scenes. I understand that the creative team was really backed into a corner and pretty much had to start over and write a brand new movie after Chadwick Boseman sadly died from colon cancer back in 2020. I think that they did the best they could considering those circumstances. There are a few elements of this movie that do work for me, which is why I have this ranked above Love and Thunder. The tribute to Chadwick Boseman was great. I liked how the Marvel Studios logo at the beginning was focused all on T'Challa's moments throughout the MCU. Then the dedication to him after the mid-credit scene was really sweet and emotional. Namor was actually a really good villain. He might be my favorite thing about this movie. He's definitely one of the most interesting post-Endgame MCU villains. His goal and motivations make sense, his backstory is intriguing, etc. I do like how they decided to have Shuri be the main character for this movie. It allowed them to really flesh her out more. Unfortunately, this movie has too many issues that keep me from loving it. This has probably been talked about a lot, but I really wish they had just recasted T'Challa after Chadwick Boseman died. I understand why they didn't do that, but I feel like T'Challa's story was just getting started and that it was too soon to just kill him off. I feel like this movie needed T'Challa in order to work. I also don't like how they killed off T'Challa. Having him die from some illness just felt wrong to me because it just seemed too similar to how Chadwick died from colon cancer. I would have preferred having him die in battle instead. A more heroic death would have been more fitting if you ask me. Having Ramonda die towards the end of the second act fell off to me. I don't know how to describe it, but it just comes out of nowhere and doesn't feel like there was any foreshadowing to it. Not to mention that once we get to the final battle, her death is almost forgotten about and not really talked about as much. I might be in the minority on this, though. Probably my biggest issue with this movie is that it's honestly a very boring film. This is probably the most boring MCU film, if you ask me. I don't know if it was the pacing or the writing, but I get bored so many times whenever I watch this movie. Sure, there are some interesting elements sprinkled throughout, and the action scenes help spice things up a bit, but the story is not all that exciting or intriguing. I also found the movie to be way too long. The runtime is 2 hours and 41 minutes, making this the second longest MCU film ever. I really don't think it needed to be that long. There are a good number of scenes that I think could have been trimmed down or cut out entirely. The most notable being the subplot with Everett Ross. This should have been completely cut from the movie in my opinion. It's barely connected to the main plot in Wakanda and just feels like filler, honestly. Sure, Everett Ross was a major character in the first film and they probably thought that they had to bring him back for this one, but I think just a brief cameo from him would have been all that we needed. Anyway, there are some elements of this movie that I like, and I understand that they did the best they could considering the circumstances, but I just couldn't get into this one.
The age of Ultron is over.
This next one might be an unpopular opinion, but I have never been fond of Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, I think we can all agree that this is easily the weakest Avengers film, but I always considered it one of my least favorite MCU films as well. I was hoping my opinion would change on this rewatch. Sadly, it didn't. It's not completely devoid of quality. This movie is honestly very important now looking back, considering that it sets up most of the Phase 3 films. This movie also introduced us to Scarlet Witch, aka Wanda, and Vision, who would both go on to have very important and integral roles later in the MCU. So yeah, a lot of setup for the future of the MCU. I also love the opening scene of the Avengers attacking the Hydra base. We've already connected with these characters so much by this point that the movie felt comfortable just starting right off in the middle of a fight rather than showing them reuniting and forming a plan. I like those movies that just immediately jump right into the action. Wanda and Pietro were easily one of the biggest highlights of the film. Elizabeth Olsen and Aaron Taylor Johnson have this amazing chemistry, and you really buy their relationship as siblings. The fact that Wanda could immediately sense Pietro's death and breaks down crying because of it was so sad. But it's a really great scene. I also do think that the final battle in Sokovia was pretty cool as well. Sadly, that's pretty much all the praise I can give. There's a lot of writing issues in this movie that really keep this from being of high quality. I'm kind of mixed on Ultron as a character. He's a good villain, but he's not a great villain. Like, James Spader's performance is great and all, but I just didn't find his character to be all that interesting. This might sound crazy, but I feel like he wasn't, quote, evil enough Like, he seemed like the type of villain that would be in an Iron Man or Spider-Man solo film. He didn't feel like a need all the Avengers to stop this guy type of villain like Loki and Thanos were. That sounds odd to say because his goal and motivations are pretty insane, but it just wasn't executed well. The movie also lacked that energy that the first Avengers film had. Sure, you could argue that they were trying to make this a darker sequel, but I don't think that was well executed either. Having this movie be darker isn't a bad idea at all, but I feel like it still could have had a little bit of that energy that the first film had. One of the biggest issues with this movie, in my opinion, is the pacing. The first act is very sluggish, like it takes a while for the actual plot to get started. Then the middle act kind of picks up a bit, but still has a few scenes that hold it back a lot. It's not until we get to the third act where I was fully invested and the plot actually got interesting. I was not a fan of the subtle romance between Bruce and Natasha. I don't know where this idea came from or how it was approved, but it just did not work. Their chemistry just wasn't strong enough to find it believable or interesting, especially since it just comes out of nowhere. Thank God they abandoned this whole thing and never explored it again in any of the later films. Overall, this isn't a terrible film, and I like what they were going for, and it sets up a lot of stuff for the future, but it just wasn't well executed and suffered from a lot of writing issues.
Because right now, you're as useless as Black Widow is to the Avengers.
Black Widow is a movie that should have came out like 8 or 9 years ago. Seriously, there really wasn't much of a point doing this movie when they did, considering that Natasha literally died in Endgame, so it was pretty much too little too late to do a solo film about her. If they really wanted to do this movie, they should have done it during the Infinity Saga. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this is a terrible movie, because it really isn't. There's quite a few things about this movie that do really click for me. The best thing about this movie is that it introduced us to Yelena. I love Yelena. She's my favorite of the post-Endgame new MCU characters that have been introduced. Played by the amazing Florence Pugh, who's one of my favorite actresses working today. Yelena is just so likable, funny, and charming. I love the running gag where she makes fun of how Natasha constantly does that pose whenever she's fighting her enemies. Seriously, she made this movie. Another major highlight of this movie is the Red Guardian, played by the hilarious David Harbour. He was perfect for this character. Most of the film's comic relief moments come from him. The action scenes were pretty good for the most part. The sequence where Natasha and Yelena break Red Guardian out of the prison was a lot of fun. The climax, though I have issues with it that we'll talk about in a moment, was also pretty intriguing to watch. The opening flashback to Natasha's childhood was also a very intriguing way to open the film. With that said, this movie is pretty flawed and has a lot of things holding it back. I want to talk a little more about Natasha getting a solo film, and I'm sure a lot of you might disagree with me on this. As much as I love Natasha, I personally think she works better as a supporting character instead of a main character. One of the main reasons why is that she's technically not a superhero. Sure, she's a very strong fighter and is great at kicking ass, but she doesn't have any superpowers or special abilities. She's pretty much just a normal human being. This wouldn't be an issue if they used this movie as an opportunity to explore her character more, but it really doesn't. Aside from the reveal that she had some kind of family in her childhood, we don't really learn anything new about Natasha's character in this movie. We already knew what she went through during her time in the Red Room, since there's that flashback in Age of Ultron, and she goes into detail about it during the scene where she's talking with Bruce. Honestly, most of the character exploring moments are given to Yelena. At times, this felt more like Yelena's movie instead of Natasha's. Let's talk about those action scenes a bit more. They're good and enjoyable, but there's no logical way that they could have happened the way that they did, even by fictional movie logic. Like I said, Natasha doesn't have any superpowers or special abilities, so there's no way that she should have been able to survive a lot of the action sequences that happen in this movie, especially the climax where everything is pretty much falling from the sky. She should have been killed. Like most people, I hated what they did with Taskmaster in this movie. That big twist was so unnecessary and shouldn't have been approved. I have mixed thoughts about Dreykov as a villain. The best thing about him is Ray Winstone's performance. You could tell that he's really giving it his all with the material that he's given. I think that's what saved his character from being a terrible villain. However, I just don't think Dreykov is really that interesting of a character in general. I wish we could have gotten to learn a little more about his character and what exactly his main goal and motivations were. I think with a few script retooling, he could have been a great villain. But yeah, I'm very mixed on Black Widow. It's got some good elements and all, but it's really only worth watching so you can be introduced to Yelena and Red Guardian and know who their characters are when they show up in other movies and shows.
One eternity later.
Eternals is one of the most infamous MCU films for a lot of different reasons. The most notable being that it was the first MCU film to get a rotten rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It's now considered to be one of the worst, if not the worst, MCU films ever made. I don't necessarily agree with that consensus because I think it has some really good elements. The cast in this movie is really good. They got some really talented and well-known actors for this film, and I think they really did a good job with the material that they were given. Each member of the Eternals are pretty interesting characters in their own right. But my favorite is probably Kingo. He is such a funny and likable guy. I love how he decided to create a fictional family bloodline in order to make people less suspicious for how he's been doing movies for 70 years without aging. I do like the dynamic between Cersei and Icarus, where they have complicated feelings. I don't really know if they really love each other or not. Meanwhile, Sprite loves Icarus but can't be with him because she never ages and is stuck in the form of a child. That was some really interesting drama. The flashback showing what the Eternals did in the past over the course of the centuries was probably my favorite part of the film. I honestly wish the movie had been focused on those instead of Ed, because I found those flashbacks to be far more interesting than what was going on in the modern day. The visual effects were really well done. I think that they did a really good job at showing off each Eternal's powers exceptionally well. Everything I just mentioned are what I like to call the little seeds that showed that this could have been a great film. Sadly, the movie has a lot of things that prevent that from happening. The biggest issue with this movie is the script. The script is very messy and sometimes inconsistent. The Eternals' goal on what they're going to do once they're all reunited keeps changing as the plot goes along. I'm sure most people have said this before, but this should have been a Disney Plus show instead of a movie. I'm surprised that nobody at Marvel thought about this. This would have allowed them to be able to focus on all of the Eternals characters. One of the issues with this movie is that a large majority of the Eternals characters aren't really fleshed out or get enough focus. The only ones that actually have a major focus are Cersei, Icarus, and Sprite. They also kind of explore character beats with Kingo, Gilgamesh, and Thena. Having this be a show would have allowed them to explore the others. Just the concept of these characters is questionable. I mean, this movie introduces 10 brand new characters that were never seen, mentioned, set up, foreshadowed, or even hinted at in any of the previous MCU films, yet they've apparently been on Earth for thousands of years. Why did we not know of them until now? At one point in the film, Kit Harington's character even asked Cersei, like, where the hell were you guys when the Avengers were fighting Thanos? Sure, they try to explain this by saying that they're not allowed to interfere with real-world events or stuff like that unless it involves deviants, but that feels like just a cheap write-in excuse that they just threw in to get people to not ask that question. One thing that bothers me about this movie is that the modern-day storyline focuses on the Eternals slowly reuniting, and it seems like it's building up towards them all working together once again once they're all reunited. But that never happens. For starters, Gilgamesh, one of the best characters in the film by the way, gets killed before the entire team is even reunited. He dies before the team finds Makkari and Phastos. Then Kingo is completely absent from the final battle. No joke, he literally just gets up and leaves, and we don't see him again until the end of the movie. His explanation for why he won't fight is questionable. If he wasn't on board with the team's plan, then why has he been sticking around and helping them reunite? Why didn't he leave earlier? This is what I meant when I said that the script was inconsistent. I gotta say something about the reveal that Icarus was the one who killed Ajak. I totally saw that coming. I called it the moment that they found her body outside her house. Icarus just had that villain look on his face. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it seemed like the movie wanted or expected this reveal to be a huge shock to the audience. The two credit scenes are dumb. The mid-credit scene introduces Thanos' brother Star Fox. I'm not even going to talk about Thanos having a human brother, and that was never brought up in the past. But the fact that he's played by Harry Styles didn't work. I literally groaned in the theater when he showed up on screen. Then there's the post-credit scene that ends with a brief setup of the MCU's Blade that still hasn't happened and doesn't appear to be happening anytime soon. As of right now, this movie has had zero impact on the MCU, and you could honestly skip it if you wanted to. The events of this movie have never been mentioned in any of the MCU films that came after, nor have we seen any of the characters from this movie since then. It doesn't appear that we will ever, since none of them were part of the cast list for Doomsday. Not to mention that Kevin Feige said that there's currently zero plans to do a sequel. So what was the point of this movie? I don't hate this movie as much as everyone else does. I think it had most of the elements it needed to be a great movie. I just think the script needed a few more rewrites, just so they could work out some of the kinks and stuff that were in it.
We should do it again, but this time as a musical.
The Marvels is a movie that very few people actually saw. It's very infamous for the fact that it bombed horribly at the box office and is currently the lowest grossing MCU film to date. It made just a little less than $200 million when it came out back at the end of 2023. Now, there are some elements of this movie that I genuinely do like. My favorite part about this movie is probably Iman Vellani as Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel. I'm probably one of the few people who really enjoyed the Miss Marvel show, and her character is one of the reasons why. I liked her in this movie just as much as I did in that show. Kamala is just such a lovable character. Her fangirling over Captain Marvel and being part of a team is so adorable and funny. The best moments in the film come from her. The visual effects in this movie look decent, as well as the sets. I gotta admit that the set decorators and production designers really did a good job on this movie. Kamala's family was another major highlight. Just like on the Miss Marvel show, they're so likable and funny. Her mom, at times becoming an audience stand-in, was pure gold. Seeing Carol and Monica reunite was quite something. After all, they hadn't seen each other since the first Captain Marvel film. film when Monica was a child, so seeing Carol interact with Monica all grown up was a very intriguing element. With that said, this movie has a lot of issues. Probably the biggest issue with the movie is that it's a mess. Even though there really haven't been any reports on it, you could tell that they did heavy reshoots and script rewrites during production. The story is very clunky and the pacing is all over the place. It's like they just shot a bunch of stuff and then put together whatever they could in the editing bay. Carol, aka Captain Marvel, comes off as very bland in this movie. It seemed like they were trying to tone down a lot of the rougher edges that she had in the first film in order to make her character more likable, but her character now just barely has a personality at all. Whenever she does, though, it's inconsistent. There are times where she'll be nice and sweet, then there's moments where she'll be pretty rough, like she was in the first film, and then there are a handful of moments where she's making jokes and one-liners. Let's talk about Dar-Benn. In my opinion, she is the worst MCU villain ever. She doesn't really get a lot of screen time, but when she does, she never once feels like an evil threat at all. That's really a shame because I think she had the pieces of an interesting villain. Her being a member of Kree back in the day and feeling betrayed when Carol destroyed the whole society after finding out that Kree were the bad guys was a really interesting setup, but the fact that she waited 30 years to do this is very questionable. It feels like she should have been the villain of a Captain Marvel sequel that was set in the past or something. Also, her way of trying to get revenge is opening a big hole in space. What is that going to accomplish? Probably the worst scene in the whole film is that damn musical number. At one point in the film, Carol, Kumala, and Monica go to this planet where basically everyone there can only communicate through singing. This scene had to have been added in reshoots or in order to add humor or something. It feels like a reshoot scene. I cringe every single time that I see this scene. How did this get approved? At times, it felt like it was only included to show off Brie Larson's singing talent. Seriously, this should have been cut from the movie. Then there's the mid-credit scene where we see Beast from the X-Men films. I don't know how to feel about this scene. It seems to be a setup for all the X-Men characters showing up in Avengers Doomsday. I'm really not a fan of this decision, but that's another story for another day. Lastly, I honestly think this movie is too short. The runtime is 1 hour and 45 minutes, making this the shortest MCU film ever. I usually don't mind shorter movies, but I feel like this movie needed to be longer in order for the story to have worked. Everything feels rushed because of that. By the time we get to the third act, I said to myself, are we already in the third act? It felt like the second act was just getting started. Overall, this isn't a bad movie, and it's got some nice elements, but I feel like it really needed more time in the oven to cook, if that's the best analogy.
You'll love the brave little toaster.
I really enjoyed Captain America Brave New World on my first viewing. I was definitely not as negative on it as a lot of other people were. However, I gotta say that my opinion really changed on rewatch, and I definitely noticed its flaws a lot more than I did on my first viewing. Now, there are some good elements in this movie that I really liked. Anthony Mackie is great as Sam Wilson, as he always is, but this film really shows that Steve made the right choice of having him be the next Captain America. Harrison Ford also really impressed me as Thaddeus Ross. I was a little skeptical when they said that he would be taking over the role after William Hurt died, but Ford really gave it his all, and it's just another reminder of why he's one of the best actors out there. The rest of the cast is also great as well. I actually really liked that cameo from Bucky. Seeing him and Sam bond for a moment and briefly talking about how much they miss Steve was great. It wasn't really necessary per se, but still a decent scene. My favorite character in the film is easily Joaquin Torres, aka the next Falcon. He's just an extremely likable character and has this amazing chemistry with Sam that's so fun to watch. The action scenes were also fun to watch, especially that whole sequence in Japan on the ocean where Sam and Joaquin fight those pilots. That was probably my favorite action scene in the whole film. I actually really liked Gio and Carlo Esposito's character Sidewinder. That's impressive to say considering that he was added to the film at the very last minute, but we'll talk about that more in a moment. But yeah, he was a really interesting character. I kind of wish he had been the main villain instead, Ed. Unfortunately, there's a good amount of issues with this movie that definitely stood out to me more on this rewatch. The biggest complaint people have had about this movie is that, like most of the post-Endgame MCU movies, and I'm sure you're probably sick of me saying it, it's a complete mess. I think a lot of us figured that this would be the case considering all the reports about what went on behind the scenes. As most of you probably know, they had to go back and do reshoots on this movie 4 times because they kept getting negative feedback from test screenings. According to several sources, the story drastically changed from these reshoots. Sidewinder apparently wasn't in the original cut of the movie. The character and his whole storyline was added during reshoots. You could tell when you watch the movie that several reshoots were done. The story is just all over the place and there's some inconsistencies as a result of it. It's like they knew that this movie just didn't work and tried to salvage it as best as they could. I also thought that Samuel Stearns was a pretty forgettable villain. He's so bland and uninteresting. I I also thought the design was too ridiculous to take seriously. In my opinion, this movie felt more like a long-awaited, unofficial sequel to The Incredible Hulk instead of a Captain America film. A large majority of the movie revolves around Thaddeus Ross and his relationship to Liv, who makes a grand return for the first time in almost 17 years. Then there's a lot of moments from that movie that are either mentioned or expanded upon in this movie. Not to mention that there's the Red Hulk fight during the climax. It's like Marvel wanted to finally do a Hulk sequel but knew that they couldn't due to the rights issue with Universal, so they decided to just disguise it as a Captain America film. The post-credits scene for this movie might be my least favorite MCU post-credits scene. It's a huge waste of time. They once again try to hype us up for Secret Wars by having a character say something like, "Something is coming, things are going to change, etc." Zero new information is given to us. I don't hate this movie per se. It's passable and entertaining enough if you're looking to kill some time. But man, this movie really wasn't necessary, and its flaws definitely stick out.
You know Thor?
Yeah. Tall guy, not that good looking, needed saving.
I honestly enjoyed the first Thor a lot on this viewing, way more than I did in the past. I remember it being just okay from the times that I watched it in the past, but man, it really clicked on this recent viewing. It's not entirely perfect though. I think the script probably could have used another rewrite to work out more of the little kinks and stuff that's pretty noticeable when you watch the film. I also think the first act is a little sluggish and it takes a bit before the plot gets started, but aside from that, there's a lot about this movie that I really enjoyed. Chris Hemsworth is fantastic as Thor, such a perfect casting choice. You could tell that he was having a blast in the role. I totally understand why he's still interested in playing the role after 14 years. This movie also introduces us to the one and only Loki, played excellently by Tom Hiddleston. Easily one of the best and most popular MCU characters ever. I totally forgot how different he was in this movie compared to his other appearances. Here, he seems to genuinely be supportive of Thor and care about him as a brother, only then to find out that it was part of his manipulation in order to get control of the throne. I pretty much like Thor's friends and all the other characters from Asgard. They're pretty charming and fun to watch. The fight scenes and visual effects look great as well. But yeah, I really like this movie. It's not a masterpiece or anything and has some hiccups, but it's still a really enjoyable movie that I think was a good introduction to a great character.
And for another, we have the Hulk.
The Incredible Hulk is really overhated if you ask me. I'm sure some of you probably forgot that this is even an MCU film. It's the only Hulk solo film that they did since they legally can't make another one without Universal's involvement due to a rights issue that I won't get into because I'm sure most of you probably know the story. But man, this movie is not as bad as everyone claims it is. Sure, it's got issues. For starters, the pacing is really sluggish, especially in the first act. It took a while for the film to really get going. Thaddeus Ross is also a pretty weak villain. He's not terrible or anything, but he just isn't as well written as I think he could have been. I also think the romance between Bruce and Betty wasn't necessary. Their chemistry fell off in my opinion. Aside from all that, there's a lot that I really enjoyed about this movie. I personally really liked Edward Norton's performance as Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. Norton has always been a good actor in every movie he's been in, and I honestly wish he had stayed in the role instead of being recasted. Don't get me wrong, I like Mark Ruffalo as Bruce in the other movies, but I think Norton's take on the character was far more interesting. I think he would have had a really unique dynamic with the other Avengers. I gotta say that this movie probably has the best and most accurate depiction of the Hulk out of any MCU film. The Hulk in this movie feels like how the character is in the comics. The fight scene on the university campus is pretty much the textbook depiction of what the character's supposed to be, whereas the Hulk in the Avengers films felt more like a giant angry gorilla. Seriously, the Hulk in this movie would have made Thanos run for the hills. The fight scenes in this movie were actually really good and way better than I remember them being. I love how they showed the origin story of how Bruce became the Hulk simply through a montage that plays over the opening credits. That was a really investing way to start the movie and allow them to tell a story that didn't have to be the actual origin itself. It was actually really interesting to see all the struggles that Bruce faced when dealing with the Hulk. The fact that he couldn't get too angry or have his heart rate go up too high or else he turned into the Hulk is honestly really sad and you really feel for him. I wish the later movies had shown more of him dealing with these struggles, but I understand that would have made more sense since by the end of this movie he learns how to control it. The Tony Stark cameo at the end was really well done in my opinion, and a great way to tell the audience that the Avengers were happening. Sure, the circumstances for how the team was being formed ended up being different from what the scene seemed to be setting up, but it was still a good way to connect the movie to the MCU. Overall, I really like The Incredible Hulk and don't think it's as bad as everyone claims it is.
Doctor Strange.
That's pretty good, but it's taken.
Doctor Strange has always been a very bizarre and unique film to me. It feels different from most of the typical MCU films. Now, it's got some issues, like I found the whole thing of Mordo renouncing his sorcerer career just because Strange and the Ancient One had to defy nature's laws to save the world to be kind of dumb. I also feel like the pacing gets really clunky once Strange arrives at Comitage and doesn't really pick up again until he's confronted by Caecilius. Speaking of Caecilius, I thought he was a pretty bland villain. Mads Mikkelsen is great as always in every role that he's in, but his character just didn't interest me that much. I feel like they could have fleshed him out more. However, there's a lot that I really like about this film. I think Doctor Strange has one of the most interesting origin stories out of any of the MCU characters. The inciting incident that leads to him becoming a sorcerer is that he crashed his car because he was texting and driving. That's it, really. But we see him really dealing with the struggle of his hands now shaking constantly. Doctor Strange as a character is amazing. He's one of my personal favorite MCU characters. Benedict Cumberbatch was the perfect actor for this role. When we meet Strange at the beginning of the film, he's very cocky and has a bit of an ego to him, yet he never comes off as unlikable to the audience. When he has his accident that pretty much ends his career, instead of thinking that he deserved it, you actually sympathize with him and root for him to succeed in regaining the ability to use his hands properly again. The first act of this movie is really strong. Seeing what Strange's life as a surgical doctor is like, him getting in the accident, his falling out with Christine, and trying to find ways to deal with the aftermath is some very strong and realistic stuff. This entire first act really doesn't feel like an MCU film. I mean that as a compliment. This movie also introduced us to Wong. Seriously, how can you not like Wong? He's charming, funny, and so likable. He is underused a bit in this first film, but he really gets to shine in his later appearances. The Ancient One is also a really strong and interesting character. I'm a little disappointed that she was killed off in this film because I would have loved to have seen more of her character in the other films. The visual effects in this movie were breathtaking. The mirror dimension sequences was a lot of fun and kept me intrigued. Same with all the other fight sequences. The climax was a lot of fun as well. I'm not surprised that Dormammu, I've come to bargain, has become a huge meme. It's a meme-worthy line. Overall, Doctor Strange is a pretty enjoyable and fun film. A great introduction to a great character.
When Captain America throws his mighty shield.
Similar to the first Thor, it had been a long time since I last watched Captain America: The First Avenger. I remember it being kind of boring from the times that I watched it previously, but it also really clicked for me more on this most recent viewing. Now, it's still got some issues. I do think the pacing is really clunky. I know I've been saying that a lot, but that's honestly what the biggest issue with a good amount of the MCU films are, especially the earlier films. I also don't think that Red Skull was that interesting of a villain. I might be in the minority on that, though. Lastly, I don't think a lot of the characters were as fleshed out as I think they could have been, but that's more of a nitpick. Aside from that stuff, there's still a lot that I really like about this movie. Chris Evans was the perfect person to play Captain America, aka Steve Rogers. It's crazy to remember that his casting at the time was pretty questionable, considering that he had mostly been known for playing douchebag characters up to that point. But man, he just nailed this character. The story was actually pretty interesting, and I like that it took place during World War II. It helped give it a different feel and have a more high-stakes plot compared to the earlier MCU films. The action scenes and visual effects were impressive as always. The sequence where Steve saves Bucky and all those hostages that were being held at the base was awesome. That was probably my favorite scene in the film. The relationship between Steve and Peggy was really bittersweet. It's insane how this would go on to be a huge element of Steve's character arc in the later movies. But yeah, this movie isn't spectacular, but it's a good introduction to one of the most important MCU characters.
No, I am your father.
In my opinion, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is easily the weakest of the Guardians trilogy. However, I still think it's a pretty good film. It's just got some minor issues. I think the pacing is a little inconsistent, if that makes any sense. There are moments where the pacing will pick up, slow down, then pick up again, etc. It really goes back and forth. This movie also doesn't feel as fresh as the first film, if that makes any sense. What I loved about the first movie was how fresh, different, and original it was. This movie just feels like more Guardians shenanigans. That's obviously not a bad thing, but I would have preferred something different. Everyone probably remembers Ego's infamous line, "It broke my heart to put that tumor in her head." Why did he say that to Quill? He just outright admitted that he's the reason why his mom died. Did he seriously think that Quill was going to take that news lightly and or be totally fine with it? If he had not said that, he probably would have successfully manipulated Quill into joining him. With those out of the way, there's so many elements that really do work for me in this movie. It was great to see how much closer the Guardians are and how they seem to care about each other increasingly more than they did in the first film. There's still a lot of great humor in this movie. The funniest scene for me is probably the scene where Rocket insults Taserface's name. There's a line where he says, "What was your second choice? Scrotum hat?" I absolutely cracked up when he said that. That was a hilarious scene. Baby Groot also displays most of the film's humor, and it's very funny. This movie was the start of Nebula's amazing redemption arc. I'm going to say it, Nebula probably had the best arc out of any MCU character. We'll talk about that more as we go along. We're also introduced to Mantis in this film. She would then become a member of the Guardians after this film. She's a really great and funny character. I'm glad they kept her around after this film. What they did with Yondu in this movie is crazy. His death scene was so heartbreaking to watch, but the funeral that the galaxy held for him was beautiful. He also has 2 great lines that have now become huge memes. He may have been your father, but he wasn't your daddy, and I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. That climax on Ego's planet was so visually cool and had me on the edge of my seat. James Gunn really knows how to do cool action and climatic sequences. Overall, even though it's not as good as the first film, I still really enjoy Guardians 2 and think it's a pretty fun film.
Captain Marvel.
Don't invoke her name.
Captain Marvel is probably the most overhated MCU film. Seriously, this movie is not as bad as so many claim it is. I feel like people solely hate it simply because of comments that Brie Larson made during the promotional tour. But if you watch the film itself and put all that aside, it's really not bad at all. Now, I would be lying if I said that it didn't have problems. I will stand by my belief that Brie Larson is not the reason why people don't like Captain Marvel as a character. The issue is the writing. Brie is actually a really good actress, and you can tell that she's really trying with the material that she's given. Carol isn't unlikable or awful per se, but she's also not interesting. I can't really blame the writers for that. This task was going to be a nightmare regardless of who the writer was going to be. The character of Captain Marvel is supposed to be very strong, powerful, and practically invincible, so making a character with those qualities interesting, sympathetic, and someone that the audience can root for was going to be a struggle, and you need really strong writing to pull off. Personally, I think Ragnarok is a pretty bland villain. Because he's a twist villain, we don't really get enough time to understand what exactly his precise goal and motivations were. I feel like they should have made it clear up front that he was going to be the villain. I might be in the minority on this, but I don't think the movie should have been set in 1995. Having it be established that Captain Marvel has been around since then leads to so many questions on why we hadn't seen or heard anything about her until this movie. Carol gives Fury his pager at the end of the film and tells him that he can use it to call for help. If he's had that thing since 1995, then why didn't he call Carol for help during the events of the Avengers and Age of Ultron? Sure, she says to only use it for an emergency, but I feel like an alien invasion in New York and an AI robot trying to destroy an entire city sounds like an emergency to me. Lastly, I don't like the reveal that Nick Fury lost his other eye because Goose accidentally scratched it off. That was a stupid reveal. It completely contradicts the line in Winter Soldier where he says, "Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye." But aside from all that, there's a lot that really works in this movie for me. The cast is really good. Like I said, Brie Larson is doing the best that she can with the material that's given to her, but I think she has really great chemistry with all the other actors. I really enjoyed the relationship between Carol and Nick Fury. Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson have amazing chemistry and work off of each other really well. I would honestly be down for another movie with Carol and Fury, just the two of them. That would be a lot of fun. Goose was another big highlight. I'm a huge cat lover, so any movie that has a cat as one of its main characters gets extra points for me. The friendship between Carol and Maria was great. With just the little information we got, we were able to get the sense of how close they were with each other. Same with Carol's relationship with Monica. You just got the sense that Carol was like another mom to Monica. The reveal that the Skrulls were actually the good guys was a nice twist that spiced things up a bit. Talos was a really good character that helped you buy the fact that the Skrulls weren't bad people. That mid-credit scene was awesome. I remember the audience in theater applauding during that scene. It made me even more excited for Endgame to come out. But yeah, Captain Marvel is actually a pretty good film and doesn't deserve the hate that it gets.
The multiverse is a concept about which we know frighteningly little.
I have a love-hate relationship with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I have a lot of issues with it. Every time that I rewatch it, I expect that my opinion is going to change and my rating will become lower. Yet, it surprisingly doesn't. I somehow get enjoyment out of watching this movie. However, I can understand why a lot of people were very disappointed by this film. I think because of how great Spider-Man No Way Home was and how there was a lot of hype when they were marketing this film, I think a lot of us probably went into this movie with very high expectations and ended up being disappointed. I'll admit that I was a victim to this on my first viewing. However, I think I enjoyed this movie more and more on rewatches because my anticipation and disappointment had subsided. Now, I still think the movie has issues. It doesn't really live up to its title. The film is called Multiverse of Madness. You would expect the movie to be about them going through the multiverse and coming across a bunch of surprise cameos or something, but that doesn't happen. We only get a brief 15-second montage of that. Aside from that, the only other universe that they actually explore and spend time on is Earth 838. Maybe if this movie had a different title, there wouldn't have been such high expectations. One of the biggest issues with this movie is that, like most of the post-Endgame MCU movies, the script is very messy. It's kind of all over the place. It doesn't feel like a consistent A to Z story. The more I've watched the film, the more I've disliked the decision to have Wanda be the main antagonist of this movie. It completely ruins her arc from WandaVision. Sure, they try to explain this by saying that she's been corrupted by the Darkhold, but I feel like that wasn't worth this pretty bizarre decision. There's also so many logic flaws with her goal and motivations. So she wants to abduct America Chavez and drain her powers, which would essentially kill her, so she can go to a universe where she can be with her kids from WandaVision. What would happen to the other Wanda in the universe that she would decide to stay in? Is she going to kill her? Strange even asked her this exact question in the movie, and you see from the look on her face that she knows he has a point. I don't know, this could have been better thought out. I have mixed thoughts on America Chavez. Her character isn't annoying or anything. Hell, she's not even unlikable. The issue is that she really isn't a character. She's more of a MacGuffin. I wish they could have fleshed out her character a bit more and gave her a consistent personality. With that all said, I still really enjoyed this movie somehow, and there's quite a few reasons why. From a filmmaking perspective, it's well made and well shot. One of the reasons why so many people were very excited for this movie was because Sam Raimi was directing it. I think he did a pretty good job for the most part. Some of the shots and sequences are some of Sam Raimi's notable trademarks. The scene where Strange and the evil version of him are fighting with the music notes clearly have Sam Raimi written all over them. One of the things that surprised me about this movie was how big of a role that Christine had. Her role in this movie is actually even bigger than it was in the first Doctor Strange. I wasn't expecting that because they didn't show her much in the marketing, but it was cool to see more of her in this movie. It was interesting to see another side of the character and have her participate more in the excitement. She didn't really get to do that in the first film. Doctor Strange's arc in this film was pretty interesting. I do wish they could have explored it more, but it was interesting to see him come to terms with the fact that he still had trouble letting go of Christine and still dealing with the aftermath of Infinity War. Seeing him try to protect America Chavez from Wanda and showing her that he's not the same as the other Stranges who were willing to sacrifice her was pretty wholesome. Wong is also still just as awesome as he has always been. I like how at one point he becomes sort of an audience stand-in where he calls out Wanda for how ridiculous her plan is and how it shouldn't be worth all of this trouble. The cast performances are also really good as well. Even though I wasn't a fan of Wanda being the villain, Elizabeth Olsen's performance was great. The visual effects in this movie were actually really good. That montage sequence where Strange and America Chavez travel through the different universes was visually so cool and intriguing. Like I said, I wish the movie had been more about that and we could have seen them exploring those universes more. Even though the pacing can be wonky, I still find the movie entertaining. I don't get pissed off or nitpicky when I'm watching it as a casual viewer. I don't really know how to describe it, but I just can't say that I hated or disliked this movie because I enjoy watching it. I'm sure some of you have a film like that and probably understand what I mean. Overall, I have a lot of issues with this movie and feel like there was a lot of missed potential with it. However, I just can't find myself to hate it at all.
You got it set to M for mini, when it should be set to W for Wumbo.
Ant-Man was a bit of a refreshing kick that the MCU needed after Avengers Age of Ultron. It's full of that energy that I felt that aforementioned film was lacking. Honestly, I really enjoyed this movie a lot. My only major issue with the film is that I think the pacing in the middle act is a bit clunky at times, and there are some scenes that kind of drag on a bit. But aside from that, the rest of the movie is great. Scott Lang is a really great and likable character. Paul Rudd was the perfect actor for this guy. He could have easily come off as arrogant and unlikable, but Rudd does a really good job at making the audience sympathize with Scott and root for him. Honestly, this is probably the best written version of Scott in any of the MCU films that he's appeared in. He's an actual character with emotion and intelligence. In all of his later appearances, he's treated as a punching bag for jokes. I wish we had seen more of this Scott. That scene where he breaks into Hank's house and figures out a way to bypass the fingerprint lock was so cool. Hank and Hope were both really interesting characters and really play off of each other real well. I like how Hope initially has zero confidence in Scott and wants to handle the heist herself, but Hank won't let her. But then she slowly sees the potential and skills that he has. I like that Hank had so much confidence that Scott could pull off the heist despite Hope insisting that he couldn't. Lewis and his gang are some of the funniest, if not the funniest MCU characters ever. Every time that Lewis is on screen, I crack up. Seriously, give this guy his own Disney Plus show. That cameo by Falcon was really fun as well. It was a great way to subtly insert Scott into the rest of the MCU. All of the jokes in this movie are so funny. I like how the movie had a significantly lighter tone and didn't try to take itself too seriously, which I really appreciated. The movie still has emotional beats, but they actually blend well with the humor. The climax of this movie was a lot of fun. I love how Scott and Darren practically fight on top of Thomas the Tank Engine. That was pure gold. Some of the other action and fight scenes were great as well. But yeah, Ant-Man is a really great and fun film that I enjoy watching every single time.
You're gonna be king! You're gonna be king!
Black Panther is a really great and important film. I'm sure some of you are shocked that it's not higher on the list. I enjoyed this movie for the most part, but I don't love it as much as everyone else does because I do have a couple minor issues with it. I do think that the pacing is really slow. It's mostly in the first act. I wasn't bored when watching the film or anything like that, but at times it feels like a slog to get through. Also, at one point in the film, Shuri makes a "what are those" joke. I'm sorry, I still remember everyone in the theater cringing when she said that. That meme wasn't even relevant anymore during the time that this movie takes place. This movie takes place in 2016, just a few weeks after the events of Civil War. The "what are those" trend pretty much stopped around late 2015. But aside from that, there's so many great things about this movie. Words can't even describe how great the late Chadwick Boseman is as T'Challa. It's even more impressive watching this film now, knowing that he was already battling colon cancer during shooting. It's insane that this month will be the 5-year anniversary of his death. R.I.P. Chadwick, you are still missed to this day. Killmonger is an amazing villain. Easily one of the best MCU villains if you ask me. His goal and motivation makes sense, and you completely understand why he does the things that he does. At times, you almost kind of sympathize with him. It takes really strong writing to pull that off, and they did it perfectly. Michael B. Jordan was the perfect actor for this character. That scene at the museum perfectly establishes what kind of character that Killmonger is. The cinematography and the visuals in this movie are amazing. Ryan Coogler was the perfect guy to direct this film. He's probably my favorite African-American director working today. He knows how to get good shots while also telling a compelling story. The world of Wakanda is so pretty to look at and visually looks amazing. Seriously, this looks like a country I'd want to vacation in. The fight scenes were amazing and felt real. The challenge for the throne fights were really intriguing and kept me invested. Then the climax in the train station between T'Challa and Killmonger was good, though the VFX looked a little bit off. But Killmonger's death scene is what makes it so memorable. Like I said, you kind of feel sorry for him. Overall, despite having some pacing issues, I really enjoy Black Panther and can see why it's beloved by so many.
Alright guys, I want to take a brief intermission for one moment to talk about something since we're already halfway through. I want to talk about a new film that my good friend Peyton Lewis, who co-wrote Max Revenge on the Run with me, has just released. It's a film he co-directed with his friend Robert Blue. It is called Nublar. It's a film, it's pretty much set in the same universe as Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. It's a very creative and pretty crazy short film that I definitely recommend checking out. I think you all will really enjoy it. Down below in the description will be the link to the short film. All right. Let's get back to business, shall we?
Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is one of the better post-Endgame MCU films. It was able to be fresh and different while also still sticking to the MCU formula. Now, I loved this movie when it first came out back in 2021. I actually saw it in theaters 3 times and even had it ranked as one of my top 5 favorite MCU films. Though my excitement for the film has died down quite a bit, I still really like this film and think it's a huge crime that we still haven't gotten a sequel to it. Shang-Chi himself is probably one of the most likable MCU heroes ever. I don't know if it's the writing or Simu Liu's performance, but you just immediately like Shang the second that he appears on screen. He seems like the type of guy that you'd want to hang out and have a beer with. One thing that makes his character work so well is that he's not a superhero or anything like that. He's just a really good martial arts fighter. It helps explain why we had never met his character sooner. Katie is also a pretty decent character. This is definitely one of Awkwafina's less annoying roles. What I like about Katie is that she's not just there for comic relief. Her character will be serious when she needs to be, and it was cool to see her participate in the archery. I also really liked her friendship with Shang. You can tell that they both really care about each other and will always be there for each other. Wenwu is also a pretty decent villain. I was so relieved that they pretty much retconned the whole Mandarin twist in Iron Man 3 by having it be revealed that Wenwu was the real Mandarin. One thing I like about his character is his complicated relationship with his kids. It's clear that he genuinely does love his kids deeply, but he's also not afraid to hold them back and do something to them if they stand in his way. The action and fight scenes were amazing. I like that this felt more like a martial arts movie instead of a comic book film. The fight scene on the bus was awesome and a good way to first show off Shang's fighting skills. The chase fight scene in Tokyo was a lot of fun as well. The final battle was also really cool. The visual effects in that whole sequence were amazing. The humor in this movie is really good. I totally forgot how funny this movie is. This movie was able to balance its humor and serious moments impressively well. The humor didn't take me out of the movie as much as I was expecting. But yeah, Shang-Chi is an awesome movie, and I really hope we get a sequel to it soon.
Where's my mom and dad?
I'm gonna say it, Ant-Man and the Wasp is probably the most underrated MCU film ever. It's also my personal favorite of the Ant-Man trilogy. I'm surprised that not many people talk about this one often. I think this was just the movie that we needed right after the insane ending to Infinity War. There's a lot of things about this movie that really work. Scott and Hope's dynamic as Ant-Man and the Wasp is probably one of the main highlights of the film. Now, their chemistry in the first movie was really strong, but it really soars in this film. The way they play off of each other is really good and fun to watch. Seriously, I liked Hope way more in this movie than I already did in the first film. I liked how the movie kind of dives further into Scott's personal life and shows that it's really changed a lot since the first film. He's now able to spend time with Cassie more often and is now on good terms with her mother and her stepdad. Seriously, Scott is just the most likable MCU hero ever. You can't just hate him. The lighter tone really worked in my opinion. I jokingly say that this was the inhaler we needed right after Infinity War. Just a fun, hilarious, and feel-good comedy adventure. It's almost like a comfort MCU film in a way. Ghost, aka Ava, was a pretty decent, quote, villain. Her backstory is pretty sad, and you really understand why she does the things that she does in this movie, even if you don't agree with her. We're also introduced to Jimmy Woo, played by the hilarious Randall Park. Seriously, do I even need to talk about this guy? He's so likable and funny. Glad that they brought him back for WandaVision. This movie was also really funny as well. I think it's even funnier than the first film. Most of the humor comes from Lewis and his friends. The scene where Lewis takes the truth serum and pretty much recaps the events of this movie and the first film is easily the funniest scene in the whole movie. That scene will never get old. Having this movie revolve around Scott, Hope, and Hank trying to rescue Janet from the quantum realm was a really interesting and creative plot to explore. The reveal that Janet was alive and had been down there all those years was quite a twist. That mid-credit scene was absolutely insane, a great way to set up Scott's role in Endgame. I'll never forget seeing that scene in the theater and my jaw just dropped. But yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp is a great movie that deserves more attention. I'm sure the third Ant-Man film will be even better, right? Right?
Behold, I present you with the one that started it all.
In my opinion, Iron Man is honestly one of the most important films in the history of cinema. It was the very first MCU film ever made, being released back in May 2008. It also helped revive Robert Downey Jr.'s career. It also changed the way that movie franchises today are made, where they try to create their own cinematic universe. But yeah, I really love this movie. I'm sure some of you are probably shocked that it's not higher on the list, but that doesn't mean I dislike it or anything. It just shows how much I like the remaining 15 films on the list. But yeah, there's a lot that I really love about this movie. Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, is one of the best casting decisions in film history. I can't imagine any other actor in this role. Today, him playing Iron Man is a no-brainer, but back in 2008, this was a huge risk. A lot of people might forget that Robert Downey Jr.'s career at that time was rapidly declining due to his history of drug addiction and legal issues. The executives at Marvel were actually completely against his casting. Director Jon Favreau had to convince them to go along with it. But yeah, Downey was perfect. Tony Stark is one of my favorite film characters ever, and my personal favorite MCU character. Obadiah Stane was a pretty good villain. He's honestly one of the most underrated MCU villains, if you ask me. He honestly still holds up. Because the MCU has grown and changed so much since this film, you'd think the writing for this character would seem a bit dated, but it doesn't. His goal and motivations are very similar to a lot of the more recent villains. I also love that moment where he yells, "Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps." That scene will never get old. I totally forgot how serious and, quote, mature this movie is. It has a pretty dark story and a lot more adult elements that we never really saw in most of the later MCU films. You could tell that this movie was made before Disney bought Marvel. I honestly wonder how different all the MCU films would have been if Disney never bought Marvel and Paramount continued to be the distributor for all of them. The action scenes were a blast. The sequence where Tony breaks out of the tunnel was badass. I also love the scene where he saves a village in Afghanistan from being overtaken by terrorists. Then there's the climax on the highway, which is a sequence that always gets me on the edge of my seat. In my opinion, Jensen is one of the most underappreciated MCU characters ever. I honestly wish they hadn't killed him off in this film. I understand that it was an integral to the plot and served as the closing to his character arc, but I feel like there's so much more that they could have done with him in the later films. I'm probably in the minority on this opinion though. Let's talk about the ending. That closing scene where Tony looks at all the reporters and says, "I am Iron Man," is still one of the most jaw-dropping moments ever. Remember that in almost every comic book movie up to that point, the main hero would keep his identity a secret. So having a character outright tell the entire world that he was a superhero was a bold move. Finally, we have the post-credit scene, which became a permanent staple in all the MCU films. That post-credit scene where Tony goes into his living room and sees Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, is still an amazing scene. I honestly wish I had seen this in the theaters when it came out, because I'm sure the audiences were in complete shock when they first saw this. But yeah, Iron Man is still an awesome movie, a great start to an amazing franchise.
But I don't want to kidnap the governor?
Kidnap the governor!
This is probably going to be a huge hot take, but I love Iron Man 3 and consider it the best of the Iron Man trilogy. This is definitely an unpopular opinion because I know a lot of people hate this movie, and I really don't think the hate is deserved. It seems like most people hate this movie simply because of the big Mandarin twist. I will have to agree on that. That's probably my only issue with the movie. Seriously, they had the perfect actor, that being Ben Kingsley, playing the role, and the potential to be one of the most intriguing MCU villains ever. But then they did this whole twist revealing that he's actually an actor named Trevor, and that Aldrich Killian was apparently the real Mandarin. It just didn't work. Thankfully, they somewhat fixed this issue in Shang-Chi, which I already talked about. But aside from that, the rest of the movie is great, and I have no idea why so many people hate it. I thought it was a really intriguing idea to have Tony suffer PTSD from the events of the Avengers. It makes a lot of sense and feels realistic. He literally flew a nuclear missile up into space and nearly got blown up with it. Nobody's just going to move on with their lives like it was nothing after that. The fact that Tony doesn't have his suit for most of the movie is actually a really clever idea to show his knowledge and skills. Really shows that he doesn't need the suit in order to be Iron Man. I like the fact that this movie has a much darker tone than the first two Iron Man films, but at the same time it has a lot more energy and feels more exciting than the first two films. The climax on the dock was actually a lot of fun. Even though I wasn't on board with the decision on the villain, the fight between Tony and Adrian was a lot of fun. I love how he just kidnaps the president in order to lure Tony there. That was so ridiculous that I just can't hate this decision. It was hilariously insane. Harley was also a pretty decent character, and I liked his relationship with Tony. I honestly hope that they'll bring him back one day in a major role because I would love to see more of his character and what he's been up to. The ending with Tony getting the surgery and no longer needing the reactor to live was a pretty decent way to wrap up his first chapter in the MCU. Here's a fun fact. Robert Downey Jr.'s initial contract expired with this film, so they ended the movie this way just in case he decided not to keep playing the role. But thankfully he renewed his contract and returned in Avengers Age of Ultron. But yeah, Iron Man 3 is a really great movie and doesn't deserve the hate.
Hey Hugh, you want to play Wolverine one more time?
Yeah, sure, Ryan.
In my opinion, Deadpool and Wolverine was the exact kind of movie that the MCU needed after films like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and The Marvels. It's a very important film for a couple of reasons. For starters, it was the first Deadpool film that we had gotten in 6 years. Then there's the fact that this one integrated the character into the MCU. Lastly, it marked the return of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. After the character was killed off at the end of Logan, it was a shock that he was coming back. There's also the fact that this was the first, and so far only, MCU film to be given an R rating. My opinion on the film has really changed a lot over the past year since its release. I've enjoyed the film a lot ever since I first saw it, but I will admit that its flaws definitely become more noticeable on rewatches. That's why it's no longer my favorite film of 2024 for those who are curious. The movie does have a few issues. I think the first act of the film is a little rushed. There were quite a few shocking revelations that were pretty much just brushed off. Like Wade and Vanessa broke up off screen sometime before the events of the film. I would have liked a little more context into why they broke up and what exactly happened. And most of the characters from the first two Deadpool films are sidelined for nearly the entire movie. It's to the point where you could honestly just call them cameos. Characters like Vanessa, Blind Owl, Dopinder, Colossus, Negasonic Teenage Warhead, and Yukio really only appear at the beginning and the ending of the film. I would have loved to have seen more of them in the movie. I also want to say that Cassandra Nova was a pretty weak and forgettable villain. Now, Emma Corrin's performance as the character was great, and that's what kept her from being bland, but she's still not a well-written villain. Like, her goal in the movie was to destroy a timeline that was already being destroyed. With that all said, I still really like this movie, and there's a lot of reasons why it's pretty high on the list. The best part of the movie is easily the relationship between Deadpool and Wolverine. Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman have this fantastic chemistry that's so entertaining to watch. I would totally pay to see 5 more movies of these two guys bantering. The fight between them in the Void was awesome and does a really good job at showing how they're both almost equally matched. The fourth wall breaking moments were easily a major highlight. I love how Deadpool and the characters outright comment on how the MCU has been in a slump since Avengers Endgame and how the multiverse attempts just haven't been going well. I'm honestly surprised that Kevin Feige allowed those jokes. My favorite scene in the film is easily the scene where Wolverine just gives that minute-long rant at Deadpool. It's able to be both serious and hilarious at the same time. Hugh Jackman did a fantastic job in that scene. You can really feel the anger that Wolverine is building up inside him. It's nice that they allowed this movie to be rated R. It still keeps the exact kind of bloody violence and gore that the first two Deadpool films had. I was worried that Disney and or Kevin Feige was going to make them tone everything down in order for the film to get a PG-13 rating, but they didn't. The action scenes are just as disturbingly insane as usual. That opening sequence where Deadpool digs up Logan's grave and then uses his corpse to fight off the TVA agents was the perfect way to start the movie. It tells you right off the bat that this is going to be a different kind of MCU film. The cameos in this movie were amazing as well. I do kind of wish they had more of the MCU characters making cameos, but I understand that they wanted to focus more on the Fox Universe characters. But yeah, Deadpool and Wolverine does have problems and isn't a perfect film, but man, it's an absolute blast to watch and one that I'll probably continue to enjoy on rewatches.
Spider-Pig does whatever a Spider-Pig does.
Spider-Man Homecoming is actually the most important MCU film to me. It's the film that actually got me into the MCU and is the reason why I've been a fan of it for the last 7 years and why this video exists. So prior to this, I'd only seen 3 other MCU films. For some reason, I didn't think I would be able to get into these movies and thought they wouldn't be my cup of tea. However, I went to go see Spider-Man Homecoming for 2 reasons. The first is that it looked really interesting from the trailers that I had seen. The second is that I was a fan of the Spider-Man character. I enjoyed the Tobey Maguire trilogy from the 2000s, so I figured I'd give this movie a shot. When I went to go see the film in theaters on opening night, I enjoyed it so much that I ultimately just said, you know what, I'll check out some of these other MCU films if they're this good. That's why this film is so important to me. If it wasn't for this film, I probably wouldn't be the MCU fan that I am today. But anyway, let's talk about the film itself. Tom Holland was just perfect casting for this iteration of the character of Spider-Man. You understand the struggles that he's going through with keeping his identity a secret, dealing with typical high school drama, and desperately trying to prove that he's worthy of being part of the Avengers. He really grows and matures a lot over the course of the film. When Tony finally offers him a chance to be part of the Avengers, Peter turns him down because he feels like being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is the right thing to do for now. Let's talk about Vulture. He's honestly one of my personal favorite MCU villains. It's not just because of Michael Keaton's amazing performance, but because of how simple his goal and motivation is. He's not looking to take over or destroy the world, kill a specific group of people, etc. or anything like that. He just wants to steal the Avengers' alien technology so he can sell it to make money. That's pretty much it. I don't mind having these more grounded villains every once in a while. It helps spice things up a bit. This movie also introduced us to Ned Leeds. I love Ned. His friendship with Peter feels so genuine, and you immediately buy how much they both truly care about each other and are there for one another. That's some really great friendship stuff. I liked how the action scenes were a little more, quote, grounded than some of the other MCU films. They're still big and unrealistic sequences, of course, but they're not too over the top and feel a little more natural. If you've seen the film, you probably know what I mean. It was really refreshing that this movie had a much lighter tone than some of the other MCU films. It makes sense because the main character is a teenager and there's not really a world-threatening event going on at the moment. I can totally see why John Watts was chosen to direct this film. He knows how to do these lighthearted comedy films with a feel-good vibe to them. The high school elements felt so realistic. This movie came out right after I had finished freshman year of high school, so I could totally relate to a lot of the struggles that Peter was going through as a teenager. But yeah, Spider-Man Homecoming is a great film and the reason why I'm an MCU fan today.
I get emails from a raccoon, so nothing sounds crazy anymore.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is also an important film, but for very different reasons. For starters, it was the last MCU film to be written and directed by James Gunn since he now runs DC. It's also the last film to feature the Guardians of the Galaxy. This is definitely one of the best post-Endgame MCU films. There's so much to love about this movie. I love that Rocket was the main focus of the movie. He was always my favorite of the Guardians characters. His backstory is just so heartbreaking and sometimes uncomfortable to watch. I love the lengths that all the Guardians go in order to save him. It really shows that even though he's constantly a dick to them, they all still love and care about him. I really liked what they did with Gamora in this movie. For one thing, it's so intriguing and interesting to see this completely different side of her that we never saw in any of her other appearances. A good way to remind the audience that this isn't the same Gamora from the first 2 films, since that one was killed in Infinity War. This is the alternate timeline version of Gamora from 2014 that was brought into the MCU in Endgame. I love how she doesn't fall in love with Star-Lord again and eventually become a member of the Guardians again. That would have been too predictable and cliche. I like how Star-Lord accepts the fact that the Gamora he loved is really gone and that this new Gamora has other interests and is part of the Ravagers now. Let's talk about Nebula for a second. I love how she and Gamora to some extent swap roles in this movie where Nebula is now the straight person who wants to do things smoothly without trouble, while Gamora is the ruthless one that's willing to get violent. This movie continues her arc perfectly by showing that she's fully committed to the Guardians and truly cares about them to the point where she even cries when she realizes that Rocket is okay. She even smiles at the end of the film. That's some really great growth right there. Then there's the High Evolutionary. He is probably the most evil MCU villain ever. Let's be honest, we all wanted this guy to die more than Thanos. He is just pure evil without a sympathetic backstory, and I love it. The fact that he took pleasure in inflicting pain and suffering on animals is just appalling. The scene where the Guardians practically beat the shit out of him and throw him around the room was beyond satisfying. The humor in this movie is great, just like it was in the first two films. It's the first MCU film to use the F word, and I love how it was used in a completely random line. I also love the little subplot gag of Cosmo trying to get Kraglin to take back his comment of him calling her a bad dog. This movie concluded the Guardians story perfectly. I'm so glad that none of them died. James Gunn could have easily killed off one of them in order to bring a lot of emotion, but I think it worked best to have the movie simply end with them all choosing to go their own separate ways. That ending with everyone celebrating and having the song Og Days Are Over playing was the perfect way to end the trilogy. Overall, this is a fantastic movie and a perfect ending to the Guardians trilogy. Good luck at DC, James Gunn. I really enjoyed Superman, so if all your future movies are on that level of quality, then I think DC is in good hands.
Don't you have to be stupid somewhere else?
Not until 4.
Fantastic Four First Steps is the most recent MCU film, and I really loved it. I was very curious to see how the MCU was going to adapt the Fantastic Four, considering that the previous attempts at Fox were complete disasters. Well, I'm happy to say that we finally now have a good Fantastic Four film. I'm going to try and make this section brief because I don't want to go into spoilers since the movie is still playing in theaters. Not to mention that I only have a limited amount of video footage to use, but here's what I can talk about. The Fantastic Four team themselves are awesome. These guys were so well written and each one was perfectly casted. They really play off of each other and work amazing together as a team. Seriously, I will pay to see 5 more movies with these guys. The relationship between Reed and Sue was amazing. Pedro Pascal and Vanessa Kirby have fantastic chemistry with each other. You really get at how much they love each other and will do anything to protect Franklin. In my opinion, this movie probably has the best adapted version of Johnny Storm. I like that he was a lot more likable and less of an asshole than he was in previous iterations. There's also Ben Grimm. He's such a likable guy and one that you can't help but root for. That's all I gotta say about him. The visuals and the set designs are really great and help give off that 60s feel. At times it feels like a live-action version of those old Flash Gordon serials from that decade. Galactus is also a pretty decent villain. He's not in the movie that much, but he's investing to watch every time that he's on screen. Same with Shalabal. I do wish that they had fleshed out her character a smidge bit more, but I did enjoy what they did do. That's all I'm going to say for now. If you still haven't seen the Fantastic Four First Steps, I definitely recommend checking it out in theaters.
Far away.
I enjoy Spider-Man Far From Home a lot more than I think most people do. I mean, it seems like most people enjoyed this movie. They just thought that Homecoming was better. I personally enjoyed this movie a lot more than Homecoming, which I still do love. There's quite a bit to talk about, so let's just jump on in. One of the biggest reasons why I like this movie more than Homecoming is because of the Europe setting. It was cool and refreshing to see a Spider-Man film take place in another part of the world instead of just New York. Don't get me wrong, having a Spider-Man movie set entirely in New York isn't a bad thing at all, but I think it was cool that they decided to spice things up a bit for this movie. Seeing Peter and his class going to all these different cities and locations throughout Europe was really cool and a lot of fun. It made it somewhat feel like a road trip movie, but set in Europe. I really like how they expanded MJ's character and gave her a much larger role in this movie. In Homecoming, she had zero plot relevance, and she was usually just there in the background and occasionally had some one-liners here and there. I think they made the right choice of giving her a bigger role in this movie and really fleshing her character out more. They really decided to take advantage of Zendaya's acting skills, and I think they did a good job. MJ felt like an actual character in this movie, and you really buy her relationship with Peter. Seeing Peter still mourning the death of Tony was really emotional and heartbreaking stuff. Tom Holland deserves more credit for his performance in these movies because he's actually amazing in them. One of my favorite scenes in the film is the scene where he breaks down to Happy while they're on the plane and they both talk about how much they miss Tony. To some extent, they almost become audience stand-ins where they just don't know how they're going to be able to continue and move on now that Tony is gone. The fact that Peter finally makes his own Spider-Man suit in this movie made me happy. Speaking of Happy, I really like his relationship with Peter in this movie and how it's almost the exact opposite from how it was in Homecoming. In that movie, Happy couldn't stand Peter, but in this movie he truly cares about him and gives him the pep talk he needs in order to keep fighting. I also love the subtle hints that he and Aunt May might be a thing. The visuals in this movie are amazing. Director John Watts really decided to go all out in this movie. The effects for all the holograms and illusions that Mysterio pulls off are incredible. I actually really enjoyed the little subplot of Ned and Betty Brant becoming a couple. I thought it was really cute and funny. Jacob Batalon and Agori Rice have really strong and amazing chemistry. I honestly wish they had continued this relationship more in the next film. Mysterio is also a very interesting villain. I wasn't a fan of how his origin and motivations are connected to Tony Stark. I think what really makes his character work so well is Jake Gyllenhaal's amazing performance. Jake Gyllenhaal has always been one of my favorite actors for a while. Every single movie that he's in, no matter how good or bad it is, he always gives it his all in his performance, and I really respect him for that. I think he is the main thing that helped make Mysterio an interesting character. He's not a bland character or anything like that. I liked his relationship with Peter for the first half of the film, but I think Gyllenhaal gives the character this extra spice that he probably needed to work. That mid-credit scene is absolutely insane. For starters, we got J.K. Simmons back reprising his role as J. Jonah Jameson. On top of that, we have Mysterio framing Peter for his death and then exposing to the entire world that he's Spider-Man. I remember being so shocked by that when I saw this in the theaters. This of course leads into its fantastic sequel that we'll talk about when we get there. But yeah, I really love Spider-Man Far From Home and thought it was a good close to Phase 3 and a good start to the post-Endgame movies.
Who hired this crew? This is undoubtedly the seediest bunch of cutthroats, villains, and scoundrels I have ever seen, so who hired them?
Thunderbolts is an awesome movie. In my opinion, it's the best MCU film since Spider-Man No Way Home. I knew it was going to be something special after I saw that first trailer. That trailer looked amazing. I'm so glad that it lived up to my expectations. To me, this movie was the first sign that the MCU was starting to get back on track in terms of quality. There's so much that I love about this movie. Most of it comes down to the characters. What they did with Yelena is great. Like I said earlier, Yelena is my favorite of the new post-Endgame MCU characters. I love the direction that they took her character in this film. Without even saying it, you could tell that she's still mourning Natasha's death. But I also love how they went into detail about how she feels so guilty for all the murders she committed, including the one she committed as a child while she was in the Red Room. It really helps humanize her character. The highlight of the film is easily the Red Guardian. He's just as funny, if not more, in this movie than he was in Black Widow. The father-daughter dynamic he had with Yelena in that movie is carried over into this film, and it still really works. You could really tell that David Harbour was having a blast making this movie. Most of the humor in this movie comes from him, and it somehow really works and doesn't butcher the tone. John Walker was also great in this film. Although he's still pretty cocky and a bit of an asshole like he was in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, his character is also way more sympathetic. I loved how all the characters pretty much called him out on the things he did in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That was pretty funny. It was also great to see Ghost again. I was a little bummed that they didn't really explore her character more or give her an arc, but I was still happy to see her because I'd always wondered what happened with her after the events of Ant-Man and the Wasp. One thing that really stands out to me is how the movie delves into things like dealing with anxiety, depression, feeling guilty for things that you did in the past, etc. These are things that a lot of us can relate to, and it really helps you sympathize with the characters more. The scene where Yelena, John, Ava, and Bob are climbing up the elevator shaft was absolutely hysterical. Is it just me, or did this scene remind anyone else of that scene in The Emperor's New Groove where Kuzco and Pacha are climbing back up the cliff? Honestly, the entire cast had amazing chemistry and worked off of each other really well. You really buy all of them solely caring about each other and becoming a team. It takes really strong writing to pull that off, and I think they did it well. So excited to see them again in Avengers Doomsday. That post-credit scene was amazing as well. It's the first time in God knows how long that we've had a post-credit scene that we know is actually gonna get paid off. But yeah, I really love this movie. With this and Fantastic Four being so good, it gives me hope that the MCU is finally getting back on track.
Wait, who are you? We're the Avengers, man.
The Avengers might be the most important MCU film ever. It was a huge blockbuster hit when it came out back in 2012. I think this was the movie that really put the MCU on the map and made it the household name that it is today. This was the big crossover that so many people had been anticipating up to that point. It's a miracle that they ended up pulling it off. If this movie had failed, then the MCU probably would have as well. There's so much to praise about this movie that I don't even know where to start. Seeing Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, the Hulk, Black Widow, and Hawkeye all interacting with each other and working together was a blast to watch. They play off of each other really well and have this very interesting dynamic. The whole cast is amazing. This was the first MCU film to have Mark Ruffalo playing Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, since Marvel decided not to bring back Edward Norton. Ruffalo has been playing the Hulk ever since. Though I still wish they had kept Norton, Ruffalo is still good and plays off of the rest of the cast really well. Loki was an awesome villain. He's the perfect character to be the one that would lead to the Avengers forming. It's honestly jarring going back and seeing him as a villain in this film considering how much they developed his character in the later films and his show. The Battle of New York was a phenomenal sequence. That 360 shot of all 6 Avengers is one of my top 3 favorite moments in any MCU film. Seriously, that moment perfectly sums up the entire MCU. I know that Joss Whedon is a controversial person nowadays, but I won't deny that he was the perfect choice to write and direct this movie. His writing and directing style fit perfectly with this type of movie. This looks like a comic book movie brought to life on film, if that makes any sort of sense. Just the colors and cinematography feel like artwork from a comic book. That mid-credit scene with Thanos is awesome as well, a really good way to subtly set up everything that's to come. There's also the iconic post-credit scene of all the Avengers eating shawarma. But yeah, this is an awesome crossover and just an awesome film. I can't praise it enough.
As Guardians of the Galaxy back together again.
Guardians of the Galaxy is easily one of the best MCU films ever made. This movie was honestly a huge risk back then. While there are beloved characters today, that wasn't the case back in 2014. Unless you were a die-hard comic book reader, most people had never even heard of these characters. Of course, the movie then came out and almost everyone loved it. There's so much to talk about with this movie, so let's just jump right into it. Let's start off with the cast. These were some of the most perfectly casted roles in any film. Chris Pratt soars as Star-Lord. He really gave the character the energy that he really needed. Zoe Saldana was also perfect as Gamora. She's able to play the character completely straight while also having her come off as a bit comedic. The same can be said about David Bautista as Drax. Bradley Cooper is also hysterical as Rocket. I always keep forgetting that's Bradley Cooper's voice because of how unrecognizable he sounds. But he really gives Rocket a lot of spunk that makes the character a real riot. Vin Diesel is also really great as the voice of Groot as well. The script for this movie is fantastic. You could tell that writer and director James Gunn was allowed to make the exact movie that he wanted to make. It's kind of funny watching this now considering that he's now running DC. But yeah, Gunn has a very raunchy writing and directing style that I think fits flawlessly in this movie. The writing of this movie is fantastic. It's able to be a raunchy comedy, albeit in PG-13 form, while also having a lot of heartfelt moments. That opening prologue where Peter witnesses his mom dying was just heartbreaking. Also, hearing the backstories of Gamora and Drax was sad, and you can understand why they act the way they do. But there's also a lot of batshit insane moments as well. The prison escape scene might be my favorite sequence in the whole film. Seeing the Guardians come together was satisfying to watch. You totally buy them going from being a group of misfits that hate each other to working together as a team and caring about each other. It takes really strong writing to pull that off, and I think James Gunn pulled that off perfectly. The soundtrack for this movie kicks ass. Seriously, every single song that's played in this movie fits perfectly in the scenes that they're in. All the setups with Thanos were great foreshadowing of everything that's to come in the future, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy is a fantastic movie and easily one of the best MCU films ever made.
The soldiers of the old home guard.
Captain America the Winter Soldier is one of the most beloved MCU films of all time. There are actually a good portion of people who still consider it the best MCU film ever made. There's so many great elements of this movie that just click amazingly well. This was the first MCU film to be directed by none other than Joe and Anthony Russo, aka the Russo brothers. They would go on to direct some of the best MCU films ever. They're actually currently directing Avengers Doomsday as I speak. When you watch this film, you can totally see why Marvel keeps using them. They have a very interesting and unique directing style that really stands out from other directors. The writing for this movie is really strong. I like how it truly takes itself seriously and aims for a much darker tone than some of the previous MCU films. This movie introduced us to Sam Wilson, aka the Falcon, who would later be given the mantle of Captain America. I like Sam, he's a really great character, and I thought this movie was a great way to introduce us to him. It was great to see Bucky back in this movie again. One of my favorite things about the first film was the friendship between Steve and Bucky, so it was kind of sad to see them now be enemies. That mid-credit scene where we're introduced to Wanda and Pedro was great. A perfect way to get people excited for Avengers Age of Ultron, despite that movie not being great, but let's not worry about that. I really liked Steve's story in this film. It was cool to see him still trying to adapt to the modern day world after being frozen for 70 years. They kind of glossed over that in the first Avengers film, so I was glad that they explored it more in this movie. But yeah, The Winter Soldier is a fantastic movie. If you told me that this was your favorite MCU film, I would completely understand why. Thor Ragnarok is easily the best Thor film, and in my opinion, one of the best MCU films of all time. Seriously, this felt like Marvel's apology letter for Thor the Dark World. You could tell that they really wanted this movie to be an improvement, and my god, that's exactly what they did. One thing that really makes this movie stand out is its tone. Instead of going for the dark and serious tone that they went for in the first two Thor films, they decided to go in the exact opposite direction and go for a much lighter and more comedic tone. I think that was the smart move because it helps spice things up a bit and make this movie stand out more. A major highlight of this movie is its humor. This is probably the funniest MCU film ever. It's also the only one that I would consider to be an actual comedy. There's so many jokes, gags, and one-liners that crack me up every single time that I watch the film. Let's talk about how they reworked Thor's character a bit. In this movie, he's a lot more jokey and has a bit of a comedic edge to him. I actually like this change. I think it made Thor's character a lot more likable and stand out on his own in this movie. I also think he looked better with the short hair. I mostly enjoyed what they did with Hulk in this film. It was cool that they were able to adapt a bit of the Planet Hulk storyline from the comics by including him in this film. It was also interesting to see him actually talk in full sentences in this film. We only got glimpses of that in his previous appearances, so to see him speak full English and in full sentences was really cool. Let's talk about the look of the film a bit more. The vibrant colors are something that I really love. This is easily the most colorful MCU film ever. This movie also introduced us to Valkyrie, played by the amazing Tessa Thompson. I thought she was really great in this film and was glad that they kept her around for some of the other films. Same with Korg. He's such a funny and likable guy. Like, how can you hate Korg? Hela is also a really good villain. She honestly impacted Thor a lot. She destroyed his hammer, stabbed his eye out, and is pretty much what led to Asgard being destroyed. She did all of that in just this one movie. Loki is still just as fun and entertaining as he was in his previous appearances. His line, "I've been falling for 30 minutes," gets a laugh out of me every time. Lastly, let's talk about that phenomenal climax. Seeing Thor take down all of Hela's henchmen all at once with his lightning and hearing the Immigrant Song playing is one of my top 5 favorite MCU scenes ever. This scene might be the textbook example of who Thor's character is supposed to be. I could praise that scene all day. But yeah, I really love Thor Ragnarok. Such an awesome film with sort of a feel-good vibe to it. It's honestly my comfort and go-to MCU film if I'm looking for something to put me in a good mood.
You guys are lucky you didn't have a civil war or something over that.
Captain America Civil War is without a doubt one of the best MCU films ever made. It perfectly sets up all the films that happened in Phase 3 and ultimately the Avengers losing in Infinity War. There's so many things that I really love about this movie. Now, despite being a Captain America film, it does feel a lot like an Avengers movie because how many characters are in it. However, the parts of the movie that focus solely on Steve are really great. They do a really great job at continuing his arc in Winter Soldier. Him at Peggy's funeral and dealing with her death is so heartbreaking. The conflict between Steve and Tony was really intriguing, and it was sad to see their friendship slowly rip apart as the movie goes on. I like how the movie never picks sides and/or portrays one of them as being in the wrong. You totally understand and see both Tony and Steve's sides of the argument. This film also introduced us to T'Challa, aka the Black Panther. Seeing T'Challa dealing with the death of his father and becoming the Black Panther was so intriguing and investing to watch. I also think that this film has the best portrayal of Black Panther. He was so awesome and badass in this film. I feel like they kind of toned him down in his later appearances. But it's cool that they basically had his origin story be in this movie instead of having his solo film revolve around it. This movie also introduced us to Spider-Man. Similar to Black Panther, I thought this was a great way to introduce Spider-Man into the MCU, since then his solo film wouldn't have to focus on his origin story. My only complaint is that his inclusion in the film isn't really necessary. He doesn't really have any plot integrity, but it was still cool to see him in this film. I like that they included Ant-Man in this film as well. Scott is still just as hilarious as he was in his solo film. Him being a huge fan of Cap was also hysterical. Zemo is one of the more interesting MCU villains. He's one of the few MCU villains that actually wins in the end. Sure, he does get arrested, but he actually succeeded in his goal of tearing the Avengers apart. The best scene in the film is easily the airport fight scene. That scene alone makes the entire movie worth seeing. Seeing Captain America's team and Iron Man's team fighting each other was so investing and fun to watch. What they did with Bucky was one of the most intriguing things I've seen in any MCU film. The reveal that he killed Tony's parents made my jaw drop on my first viewing. I did not expect that reveal. There's also so many other things about this movie that I could praise, but we'd be here all day. But yeah, Captain America Civil War is a phenomenal movie and the perfect way to begin the last phase of the Infinity Saga.
I wanna go home.
Spider-Man No Way Home is a phenomenal movie and easily the best post-Endgame MCU film. I can't believe that this year is going to mark 4 years since this movie came out. I still remember when it was coming out like it was yesterday. Seeing this on opening night in a sold out and packed theater is an experience that I'll never forget. I still have the audience reactions on my phone. There's so much that I love about this movie. What they did with Peter in this film is great. It seemed like they were answering a lot of the complaints that his version of Spider-Man was just Iron Man Jr. In this movie, Peter stands out on his own and truly becomes the Spider-Man that everyone is familiar with. I like that they both gave Ned and MJ much larger roles in this movie than they did in Homecoming and Far From Home. You really buy their friendship with Peter, and you can tell that they all truly care for each other. They're the kind of friends that everyone wishes they could have. Killing off Aunt May was something that I don't think any of us saw coming. I think most of us assumed that this version of Peter's Uncle Ben moment had happened off-screen before we met him in Civil War. But it turns out that Aunt May was actually the Uncle Ben for this version, and they were slowly building up towards that moment. The writing of this movie is genius. Screenwriters Chris McKenna and Eric Summers don't get enough credit for how they pulled this off. The film revolves around characters from the Sam Raimi and Mark Webb Spider-Man films being brought into the MCU. That's an interesting concept on paper alone, but I could totally see in an alternate universe, no pun intended, where the finished film ended up being a complete disaster due to horrible execution. But that thankfully didn't happen. You can tell that McKenna and Summers really thought through every little story beat and made sure that they cracked the right story. That's one of the reasons why I consider this the best post-Endgame MCU film. It feels like a movie that was made during the Infinity Saga. Seeing all the villains interacting with each other was such a blast to see. I never would have thought that I'd see Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin and Alfred Molina's Doc Ock interact with each other or see them have a conversation with Jamie Foxx's Electro. But I really love how they give most of the villains their own little arcs and cure them before sending them back home. They could have easily done the whole thing of them fighting the villains, having them getting defeated, and then going away, etc. But what they did was far more interesting. I think we all knew that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Mans were going to be in this movie, considering that all the villains were coming back. But it was still an unknown possibility. I love how they completely hid their appearances in every single piece of the marketing. They could have easily shown them in all the trailers to get people excited, and they probably would have gotten a $1 billion opening weekend gross. But they didn't do that because they knew that keeping their appearances a secret was going to be worth the shock and surprise. I still have audio of how the theater in my screening reacted when they showed up. It was just an insane experience that I'm so glad to be a part of. What I love about Tobey and Andrew's roles in this film are the fact that they're not just simple cameos that show up for a scene or two. They have major roles and loads of screen time in the entire third act. Not only do we see them helping Tom's Peter, but we also get character arcs from both of them as we learn what they had been up to since we last saw them. Hearing that Andrew never got over Gwen's death in Amazing Spider-Man 2 and how this led to him not pulling his punches anymore is honestly heartbreaking, but also understandable. Seeing him redeem himself at the end by saving MJ was so satisfying to watch and got a huge cheer from the audience on opening night. Tobey's Peter in this film was also great to watch. I like how he seems to be this older and wiser version of Spider-Man, which makes sense because he was the first. But it was cool that, though we don't hear much about what he'd been up to since we last saw him in Spider-Man 3, he actually worked things out with his MJ and they seem to be together now. That's what I really loved about their roles in this movie. They gave proper closure to their characters since their planned sequels had been cancelled. The climax on the Statue of Liberty was really fun as well. Seeing all three Spider-Mans working together was so cool and fun to watch. I still cannot believe that we actually got this. But yeah, I love Spider-Man No Way Home. Such a great movie, and I'm so excited to see what they do with the character when Brand New Day comes out next summer.
To infinity and beyond!
Avengers Infinity War is a phenomenal movie. It's hard to believe that it's already been 7 years since this film came out. I'll never forget going to see the film on opening night, April 27th, 2018, in a packed movie theater and experiencing everything with that audience. I was 16 going on 17 and just finishing my sophomore year of high school at that time. It's just amazing how, long it's been already. But yeah, there's so much to praise about this movie. Thanos is easily the best MCU villain ever. He's also, in my opinion, one of the best movie villains in all of cinema. This is how you do a well-written villain. His goal and motivation is pretty simple, and his reason for it is honestly somewhat justified. You can see where he's coming from and why he wants to wipe out half the population, even if you don't agree with it. It's sort of a doing the wrong thing for the right reason sort of scenario. I liked how he was pretty much the main character and that the whole movie was told from his perspective. That was a pretty clever choice, but I also think that they do a good job at humanizing him somewhat. He actually sheds tears and feels remorse when he kills Gamora in order to get the Soul Stone. Josh Brolin honestly should have gotten an Oscar nomination. The way they handled the amount of main characters in this movie is incredible. I feel like screenwriters Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely deserve a lot more credit for how they pulled this off. With the exception of Hawkeye and Ant-Man, this movie was set to feature every single MCU character that had been introduced up to this point. So trying to juggle that many main characters and naturally incorporate every single one of them into the plot could have and honestly should have been a complete disaster. But Marcus and McFeely were somehow able to write a script that handled them all flawlessly and naturally. Along with the official Avengers, characters like the Guardians, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and Black Panther were all able to have integral roles in the film. It didn't feel like they were only there just so the movie could have every single MCU hero. They all felt important and relevant to the plot. That takes extremely strong writing to pull off, yet by some miracle, Marcus and McFeely succeeded. Let's talk about the look and feel of the film. This was the first Avengers movie that Joss Whedon didn't write or direct. Instead, the Russo brothers were once again brought back to direct this movie, and I think they were the perfect directors to helm a movie like this. They clearly knew how to handle a lot of characters considering that they did something very similar on Civil War. But their directing style really shines in this movie, just like it did in Winter Soldier and Civil War. I don't think a lot of other directors would have been able to handle a huge movie like this, so it was smart to bring the Russo brothers back. The opening scene of this movie is one of my favorite opening scenes in any film. The first 10 minutes perfectly set up what kind of movie this is going to be. They're able to establish right off the bat what kind of character that Thanos is going to be and how he's not like your typical MCU villain. They also make it clear that they're not going to be playing around at all by killing off both Heimdall and Loki, two fan favorite characters, in these first 10 minutes. It's a great way to tell the audience this isn't going to be a typical MCU film, things are going to be different, not every character is going to make it out of this movie alive, etc. The action scenes are amazing as well. The battle on Titan was filled with a lot of suspense and keeps you on the edge of your seat wondering what the outcome is going to be. The Battle of Wakanda, which happened simultaneously, was also a lot of fun. Thor's entrance during the battle is still awesome even after all these years. The CGI in this movie is incredible. It feels real and not dated at all. Thanos looks and feels as if he could have been a real person. Same with his army. It's some of the best CGI that I've ever seen. Of course, the biggest thing about this movie is the ending. For the first time ever in the MCU, something that rarely happens in movies occurs. The bad guy wins. Thanos is able to collect all the Infinity Stones and successfully wipes out half of the universe. I'll never forget sitting in that packed theater on opening night and hearing all the gasps and screams from the audience as their favorite MCU characters just disintegrated to dust. Then the end credits roll. I still remember everyone in the theater just staying in their seats and sitting in absolute horror as they tried to process what just happened. This is probably my favorite cliffhanger of all time. It just leaves you horrified and wondering, how the hell are they going to fix this? People who are new to the MCU and playing catch-up now have no idea what it was like for people like me who saw the movie when it came out. Now they can just immediately go watch Endgame. That wasn't an option back in 2018. We had to wait a full year for Endgame to come out and find out what happened next. Let me tell you something. Waiting that entire year and making theories on what was going to happen in the next film was quite something. But yeah, Infinity War is a phenomenal movie and one of the best comic book films ever made. Yet there is still one more movie that I think is even better. In my opinion, Avengers Endgame is the best MCU movie ever made. A great finale to the Infinity Saga and a perfect send-off to a lot of the characters. I can't believe it's already been 6 years since it was released. I was 17 going on 18 and just finishing my junior year of high school. I still remember all the hype and anticipation leading up to the film's release. I don't think any other film was this widely anticipated. After Infinity War ended on such a major cliffhanger, with half of the characters turning to dust, the year-long wait for the next film was insane. We didn't even know what the film's title was going to be until the teaser trailer dropped a couple weeks before Christmas in 2018. But let's talk about the film itself and why I love it so much. I like how the first act of the film really focuses on the Avengers and the rest of the world to some extent, dealing with the aftermath of Infinity War. You really get the sense that they actually lost against Thanos and that it seems like there's nothing they can do to bring back everyone that vanished. The acting from the entire cast in this portion of the movie is spot on. One thing that doesn't get praised enough is Scott's story in this film. As we all know, he was stuck in the quantum realm when the snap took place, though he was one of the survivors of it. So when he was finally able to get out 5 years later, he's very confused and has no idea what's going on, especially since for him, he was only in the quantum realm for 5 hours. When we see him reunite with his daughter Cassie, who is now a teenager, it's some really emotional stuff. The fact that Scott is the one who figures out that the Avengers could time travel in order to bring everyone back is really clever and a nice way to use Scott instead of just for jokes. Though I will admit that I thought it was funny how the only reason why he was able to get out of the quantum realm is because a rat accidentally stepped on the button that turns the machine on. So basically a rat saved the whole universe. The fact that Thanos, practically the main character of Infinity War, gets killed off just 17 minutes into the film's runtime is just one of the biggest and most shocking twists ever. I don't think a single person saw that coming at all. I'll never forget my jaw just dropping in the theater when Thor chopped his head off. The fact that the Thanos that the Avengers fight in the final battle is a different version from the past is pretty creative. Definitely would have been more satisfying if it was the Infinity War Thanos in that third act, but what they did do was pretty cool. But yeah, definitely something that nobody saw coming. Tony Stark's arc in this film is also great as well. I truly think that Robert Downey Jr. deserved an Oscar nomination for this movie. You really buy the struggles that Tony is facing. His worst nightmare, something that he had been anticipating since Iron Man 3, had finally come true. Yet he decides to try and move on by starting a family with Pepper and having a daughter. I like that his relationship with Peter Parker is what ultimately makes him decide to help the Avengers bring everyone back. That moment where he extracts all the Infinity Stones and then says, "And I am Iron Man," is still one of my favorite moments in any film ever. Then there's his death scene. Oh my god, that is easily the saddest scene in any MCU film. They really went all out on that scene. It was a great send-off to the character of Tony Stark. Though RDJ is now returning to the MCU as Doctor Doom, I'm not on board with that decision, but again, that's another story. The way that the movie concluded Steve's story was really bittersweet. It was sad to see that he's now grown old and ultimately decides to pass the Captain America mantle to Sam, but to know that he got to live the life he always wanted to with Peggy is so emotional and satisfying. Unlike a lot of other people, I actually didn't mind what they did with Thor in this film. The fact that he failed to kill Thanos in Infinity War led to him feeling so much guilt that he just started drinking and getting fat is honestly pretty believable and an interesting route to go after how heroic and badass he was in the previous film. I also liked how, despite putting on a lot of weight, he was still able to be badass in the final battle. Seeing him get closure with his mother was also really sweet as well. Natasha's death scene was also really sad to watch. The scene on Vormir in this film is really interesting because of how it's the exact opposite of what happened in Infinity War. Seeing Natasha and Clint fight each other, decide who will jump off the cliff and sacrifice each other is just so sad. The fact that Natasha is ultimately the one who dies is just really emotional stuff, but she knew that Clint had a family that was going to need him. The last character I want to talk about is Nebula. I truly believe that she had the best arc out of any other MCU character, and this movie really does a great job at showing how much she's grown. In the first Guardians film, she was pretty much the secondary antagonist. In this movie, she's one of the survivors of the snap. She helps the Avengers on their time heist to get all the Infinity Stones in order to bring everyone back. However, her network ends up getting linked to her old self from the past, who hadn't been redeemed yet, and alerts Thanos of what's going on. Seeing her interact with her past self is like night and day. They do a really good job at showing how much she's grown by putting her in the same room as her old self. She's then able to get the Gamora from the past to help the Avengers defeat Thanos. At the end of the film, once all the Guardians are reunited, Nebula is with them, and it seems like she's going to be joining them on their future adventures. It's kind of like she's taking Gamora's place and continuing what Gamora would have done. It's really great character growth, and they expand on that even more in Guardians 3. Karen Gillan's performance in all of these movies is so overlooked. Seeing the Avengers time travel to previous movies was so cool and fun to watch. Revisiting those prior films, but from a different perspective, is not something that a lot of franchises can do without feeling like nostalgia bait. The main thing that makes me like this movie more than Infinity War is the third act's final battle. Let me tell you something. The scene where everyone comes back is so satisfying and had the audience in the theater applauding. It was a great way to show that their time heist worked and that they did it. Then we get to the moment where pretty much every single character from every single MCU film up to that point is together on the battlefield, and Captain America says, "Avengers, assemble." Not only do I think that's the best scene in any MCU film, I think it's one of the best scenes in cinema. Seeing that scene for the first time on opening night left me speechless. Finally, let's talk about the end credits. This is currently the only MCU film to not have a post-credit or mid-credit scene, but what they do for the end credits makes up for that. The way they showed off the entire cast was so awesome, especially when they did the cast for the original 6 Avengers by having the actors' signature appear alongside their names. That's how you do end credits. But yeah, as you can see, I love Avengers Endgame and consider it the best MCU film ever made. I'm going to be honest, and I'm sure most of you probably agree with me on this, but part of me thinks that maybe the MCU should have ended after this movie. When you think about it, it would have been the perfect finale to this franchise. The MCU has not been the same since this movie, but judging from the 2 most recent films, it might finally be getting back on track.
All right. There you go. That was all of the ranking for the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it. Stay tuned for my next video coming soon.